This is the Chicks of Fintwit, a finance podcast by women for everyone. I am your host, Caitlin Cook. Join me as I highlight female trailblazers and their male allies across the industry as each shares their expertise on a variety of finance topics. Nothing is off limits. Thanks for joining us. Now please enjoy this episode.
All opinions expressed by Caitlin Cook and the Chicks of Fintwit podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of the host or any of their affiliates. This podcast is for informational purposes only, is not investment advice, and should not be relied upon for any investment decisions. We are not recommending any securities, nor is this an offer or sale of a security.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Chicks of Fintwit podcast, the finance podcast by women for everyone. I am your host, Caitlin Cook, otherwise known as the infamous @DeadKateBounce on Twitter. And today's guest is Brenna Hardman. I met Brenna by chance a few months ago in San Diego, actually, via Twitter, go figure, and was out there for Onramp Invest MVP launch. We organized a little happy hour with the Fintwit community out there, as one does. Brenna and I ended up hitting it off, hung out more before I shipped back to Chicago. And not to steal your thunder, Brenna, because I'll ask you about it as well, but you've had quite the career, and I find you fascinating for a lot of reasons. I think I've told you that before, but we'll get into it. By way of background, Brenna is a financial markets professional with years of trading, media, marketing, compliance, and broadcast experience. Not sure how she's done all of those things already, but can get into that some more. Creates high conversion marketing campaigns and investor relations programs for hedge funds, prop trading firms, crypto firms. But she did begin her career in the trading pits back here in Chicago, close to my heart, CME Group and CBOE trading floors. Brenna, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. That was a great introduction, and I'm so glad we connected months ago.
Me too. So I tried to do you justice. Like I said, I find you fascinating. You've done so much. So maybe just start off by giving our listeners a little bit more information on your background and how you got into finance in the first place.
Well, my first kind of brush with finance was when I was really young, and I asked a very close family friend what stocks and bonds were, and they couldn't explain it to me. And I think as a child, when someone is like, oh, someone will tell you about it when you're older, it kind of sticks with you. So that was my first introduction into the world of financial markets. And then I went to school at DePaul University, studied finance. And then while I was going to school, I started working at the old Merck floor, the CME Group, and then moved over to the CBOE. So I spent a few years on the trading floors in the pits, in the SPX, and in the VIX during the 2008 financial crisis, which was quite a way to learn about stocks and bonds. So about, I don't know, what was that? 11, 12 years later from when I kind of first asked that question, finally was answered. During college, during university, I studied option markets, I studied derivatives, but it never really sunk in until I worked on the trading floors and I actually saw it in action. So I really fell in love with it on the trading floors in Chicago. And then since then, I've worked with different types of financial firms and marketing and media, and really trying to highlight the best of breed, whether it's in trading or portfolio management or other types of financial companies.
Well, let's start with the 2008 financial crisis, because I don't know if we've talked about this before. And you probably get this a lot when you mention that. But what was that experience like, learning in that, I don't even know if chaotic describes that time period, but what did you learn from that? And I feel like that's just being thrown straight into the fire.
Gosh, I mean, it was probably, aside from getting into entrepreneurship, the most stressful part of my life in finance so far. Because being in the trading pits, I mean, every day was a fast market. Like the VIX was in the 80s at one point, and we were filling orders back to back. So we had institutional firms calling and placing very large option orders. And if there's one thing that's wrong when you're placing a trade, it can be millions and millions of dollars. So it was very stressful carrying that weight throughout the day. And you're surrounded by people who are yelling and screaming and pushing one another. And as a female down there, it was a lot to it was a lot to handle. There was a lot of drinking involved. I'll say that. Like when the trading floors closed and the bell rang, like most people went across the street and like started happy hour. And that was just a way to kind of decompress. And I quickly learned through that's like not the way to handle stress. Like doing yoga and other forms of exercise is way better. Like drinking's fine, but don't do it to decompress, right? So I learned a lot about how to like handle situations that are high stress. I also think I grew a very thick skin because I heard things on the trading floor that, you know, were wildly inappropriate and were uncomfortable. And I just had to deal with at the time because I wanted to learn and I wanted to have that job. And I wanted to grow from it. So what I did is I started taking all these licenses. So like the FINRA Series 3, the Series 4, the Series 7, the 24, the 63, until my compliance officer literally told me, you need to stop because you're going to have more compliance licenses than I am. And I was like, well, maybe you should start taking more. Like, don't hold me back. Get out of my way, you know? So I learned a lot.
Wow, all of those exams willingly. Good for you. Couldn't be me, but I guess tying all of that experience to today, the first thing that came to mind, which is maybe just a sign of the times, is around, you know, everyone's talking about TikTok and social media financial advice. When it comes to your experience kind of on the options trading side in general, what are your thoughts on that from working in a professional capacity and seeing that advice kind of thrown around a lot of the times, maybe incorrectly online?
It's so interesting. It's fascinating how things have evolved. I mean, as someone who used to have a Series 7 and 24 register, like I couldn't go on Twitter and say, I recommend this, or I'm seeing this in the market. Like we were held back in many ways. And I actually talked about this with other people in depth. Like there was this great wall around Wall Street, like the professionals who were regulated and licensed couldn't speak up in ways about what was going on in the markets. I think that's changing a lot now and has changed, thankfully. But it's oftentimes you see people with less experience that have a bigger voice in media. And I hope that changes because the financial professionals who are licensed do have a lot to say and to educate people on. It's interesting, this thing came up with like Robinhood and Vlad, like how he's not licensed yet he's running, you know, the largest retail trading platform that has ever existed, right? So it'll be interesting to see how it all develops and shakes out. I mean, I know one of my colleagues listens to TikTok advice and makes crypto trades based on it. And I'm like, I don't take advice from anyone. I do my own research. Like I will not trade or put a position on something that someone else has told me to do unless I really believe in it and have done the due diligence myself. So I think, you know, innovation always comes before regulation. Like we're seeing it happen with crypto. We're seeing it happen with financial advice. And it's all good for markets. Like people should have a voice. They should be able to share their thoughts, opinions, research, etc.
Yeah. And the kind of going into the crypto side of things, right? Because we are both now crypto girls in a TradFi world. As I suppose I like to put it now, but let's talk about crypto a bit, because I think especially on like the social media side of things, there's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot to kind of sort through from an information standpoint. It's just being thrown everywhere. It's just kind of the shiny new object that's out there. And of course, we've talked about this offline. I mean, we both see the potential in the long term for this technology to just revolutionize the way that we do everything, not just the financial system in general, but everything. So maybe let's talk about how you got into crypto. And I know that you went to the really big like Bitcoin conference in Miami too. So maybe just what are the thought leaders out there saying, and what are the most interesting things to be looking out for in the space now? Sorry, that was a lot of questions.
No, it's okay. Just real quick how it started. It started in two ways. One was a 14-year-old telling me about Bitcoin and how he was setting up a mining rig in his basement in like 2016. And I was like, what are you talking about, 16-year-old? He's like, yeah, and I'm converting the stuff in my games and I'm using it as a currency. And I'm like, okay, that's really interesting, but I didn't really do anything with it at that point until I got a call from a crypto hedge fund who was like, will you do some marketing for me? I need help. I want to raise capital. So I started digging into his strategy and his thought process behind Bitcoin and some of the other crypto assets, and was like, okay, this is very interesting. I want to help this guy. And he had incredible returns. So I was like, okay, pay me in Bitcoin. So he paid me in Bitcoin, and then another fund called me, and that's how I started getting into it. And then I started buying it myself. Fast forward, I've helped like quite a few funds, whether they be single portfolio managers or multiple managers or crypto token firms, start different marketing programs. So I've learned a lot along the way. The Bitcoin conference was unlike any financial conference I've ever been to. I mean, 15,000 people in Miami in Wynwood was a lot. You had everybody from professional traders and portfolio managers to, a guy from Ohio that like worked at a gas station, and he was in one of the lines with me and was like, yeah, I had my parents second mortgage their house so I could get Bitcoin, like crazy stories down there. But it just showed like how much excitement there is for decentralized finance. And I think this is coming out of 2008 and this feeling of distrust in financial systems, that there needs to be more accountability and it to be decentralized. So, there isn't a specific group holding all the keys to the kingdom. It's like everyone has the keys to the kingdom, and there's governance along the way. And I think the last question you asked about like, what is the most exciting and what am I looking for? It's different crypto tokens that have a lot of developer activity around them. It's like one of the tokens I've been buying a lot of is Solana, and it has a ton of developer activity and really interesting projects going on top of the Solana blockchain. But I am just scratching the surface. Like there's so much to learn about blockchain and DeFi, as you know, and it's just like an endless rabbit hole. I'm just like nibbling along the way.
It is such a rabbit hole, and I don't even know if I've even scratched the surface yet. I feel like I'm just tapping it. I don't even know what comes before that, but it's just the more that I've learned, the more I know how much I don't know. And it's so crazy, right? Because it's such a high growth space right now. It's like every single day, I mean, obviously still learning too, but there's just so much going on from like a project standpoint, different protocols, I'm like, it's so hard to keep up. Yeah. And it's been very interesting with like the different types of people that you see in the space, because I mean, I think that there's a lot of like substantial potential there to grow into a lot of different things. But from a social media standpoint, I've had a lot of friends who aren't quite as much into finance. And you've probably had this as well, where it's, the crazy crypto people. And there's a lot of really intelligent people in the space. It's just like you were saying before on social, there are a lot of people with bigger presence that are kind of getting the microphone a bit more. So on that note, I guess, what is there, and I don't expect you to have the answers to all of the world's problems, but what do you think can be done in regard to kind of changing the narrative around crypto? Because I think there's a lot of misconceptions right now.
I mean, really, I think it's about like enablement and empowerment, right? I mean, for people who didn't live through the 2008 financial crisis and see like what happened with AIG and Fannie and Freddie and all these different banks that literally like poofed out of existence because of really bad financial practices. I think what the people who are like poo-pooing crypto basically need to know is that there's so much more governance and empowerment to individuals within a decentralized world, whether it's in finance or other areas. Like, if you're a token holder of certain protocols, you actually have a vote and you have a voice in changing the way things are developing within that protocol, within that project. So you're empowered. It's also the way I see different tokens and projects is like it's in the early stages, kind of like Facebook and Google and these other tech companies. And you have the ability to participate and be in at an earlier stage than you would 10 years from now. I mean, when I think about what's happening with regulation, we moved from banning crypto to now regulating crypto. So it's very similar to what happened in the cannabis space. Like, I live in California and I moved here 6-7 years ago when there were dispensaries around, but they weren't regulated and the feds were going in and shutting them down every single day, but you couldn't stop it. You can't stop it because it's something that grows naturally. And crypto is very similar. Like, this is grown organically from like grassroots and people who are passionate about a better way of creating financial systems. So I think it's very similar to that. And I just, I'm excited because for a while, I think people were afraid of, it being banned, but now they're talking about regulation, which is a good thing.
Yeah. And I think that you made a lot of really good points on that, but it's very hard to stop something that, I mean, just the growth has been incredible, but it's hard to stop something that's everywhere. It's decentralized. There's not a single point where you can kind of like stop the flood, so to speak, and it'll all go away. It's everywhere. Anyone can be building these protocols. Anyone can be building blockchains. So I really don't see a way to shut it down. I don't think that we should, right? I think this is just incredibly innovative and we're not at the point where everyone's, totally understanding it yet, but writing a piece for Onramp right now, a little plug, but it's like you look at the biggest technological innovations in history. How many of those had major pushbacks? Every single one. And did it stop them? No. So I just think that it's a lot in framing and a lot of it, that we're both feel really strongly on the educational front on this because there's so much to learn. But I think a lot of it just comes from people taking the time to get a better understanding of it and how it affects them. Because right now there's just stories running rampant and I can say from working in it, but having family members that don't know quite as much, it's like, it's so easy to get caught up in those stories and to believe the headlines without digging any deeper. And I think that that's the one way that, this is very like tech heavy space, but also social media sort of hurts it in that regard, just because it is kind of spreading some really interesting information very fast, but it also is the way that the network has continued to grow too. So
yeah, and I would say to a lot of those people, like, do a transaction on the blockchain versus doing it through the traditional banking system and see how you feel after that. Because you're going to be paying less fees, you're going to get your money there faster, and you can see it on the blockchain. Like, it's so much better. I mean, when I send money to people who have a wallet, as opposed, I prefer sending Bitcoin or crypto over USD now. It's just so much easier and I get charged way less. So it always helps to like do something rather than have an opinion about it. Like, do it and then see, right?
Yes. Yes. I think a lot of people could do that. Educated.
Phrase it like, just do it.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're listening this, not financial advice, but, encourage you, open a wallet, try it out before forming an opinion. We don't need to have strong opinions about everything unless you know enough to have a strong opinion. Totally fine. That's why the education piece is so important in my mind, right? Like, I'm not telling you to love crypto. I'm just telling you that before you hate crypto, to learn about it and have an actual reason that you're basing in fact on what you don't like about it, instead of making up kind of like false things or just like imaginations in your head about why it's so bad. So that's the end of my plug there. But
on that note about like Onramp and education, I was working with a financial advisor in San Diego 2 years ago, and he had clients sending in emails to him saying, I'd really like to get involved in crypto or Bitcoin. How can I do that? And the broker dealer literally just said, no, we're not having any access to cryptocurrencies. Like, we just can't do it. I don't know what's going on with that broker dealer now. I'm hoping they haven't done that, because I think they're doing a disservice to their clients by not allowing it. And as a broker dealer, as a financial advisor, you have a fiduciary duty to enable your clients to access some of the best financial instruments. And considering crypto is one of the best performing asset classes of all time, is a financial advisor or broker dealer to say absolutely not, you're really doing, I think, a disservice to your clients. So he actually was invested in cryptocurrency himself, but like couldn't provide that access to his clients. And I'm like, holy cow. And I'm just like, at the time was trying to find information that he could send to the broker dealer for them to get educated about crypto. So, I mean, what you guys are doing is going to help so many people in the whole financial advisor world, because they're really, before Onramp wasn't a place for them to go to access all these educational materials to learn more about crypto assets. So
well, what an advertisement. Hashtag not an ad. I did not request that, so thank you. But just for the disclosure there. But I mean, I agree, right? You talk to a lot of advisors, and the way that I kind of compare it, and it's not perfect, but in my last role as a wholesaler, I worked with all kinds of advisors. You meet advisors that absolutely hated gold. They hated high yield. They hated emerging markets. They hated ETFs. But you know what? If a client came to them, there is a basic understanding that they need to have, regardless of whether they're ever going to invest in them or not. And that's the way I look at crypto too. It's becoming too popular. It's too high performing of an asset class. And it is an asset class, which some people still argue against as well. If we're talking about the details, but it's just too in your face to continuously push it off. And you're putting your business at a disservice if you continue to assume that it's just like going to go away, because as we talked about, there's no way to stop this train from rolling. Like, they're very clearly going to add regulation around it, but that's much different from the conversation we were having before of them just like trying to eliminate it entirely.
Yep.
But enough on the crypto, because we could do this all day. We could bring you back for a separate crypto podcast. But the one thing I did want to talk about quite a lot, and I wanted to talk about all of these things, of course, but one of the conversations that you and I have had offline when we've met before is just around entrepreneurship and around multiple income streams and the sort of freedom that it provides. And I just thought that your take on that was really interesting. So maybe if you give a bit of an intro, don't have to say, where you're working or anything, obviously, but just the experience that you've had with, multiple hustles, I guess, so to speak, and why you think that that's such a good way to go for a lot of people that are out here hustling and trying to make a name for themselves.
Yeah, of course. So I like to call it triangle income, and always try to have multiple sources of income, because what I've found over time is when you rely on one, that creates a lot of like stress in life, right? And I'm fortunate to have been in places where I've had multiple income sources. I'm by no means, tone deaf to the fact that some people like don't even have a job, and I'm very fortunate for that. And I always strive to not rely on one source, because it scares me, to be honest. Like I just don't want to be that reliant on someone else or another firm or a firm's leadership to make decisions that is going to affect my entire life and my well-being. And that's another reason why I got into entrepreneurship, was because I was unhappy at a firm. I was working somewhere where I was hustling internally to create a lot of different marketing materials and items for our clients, and we were doing great work, but my compliance officer time and time again was like, that's going to have to wait like 4 weeks to get approved because we got all this other stuff to do. And I was like, well, this is very timely. Like, this is a marketing campaign that needs to go out tomorrow. And I was tired of hearing no or like later. And then in 2012, the Jobs Act passed and hedge funds were able to advertise. So at that time, I'm like, well, most hedge funds don't advertise. They don't even have a landing page. They have like nothing. They're not on social media. So I think this is a really good area for me to get into. And so I literally walked out of my job, out of my office, like after a not so satisfactory conversation with my boss about my position, and decided to start my firm called Buy Side Design. So through that, I got a taste of triangle income and having income from various sources. And so I really try to have that in my life at all times. And I encourage other people to, because I know people that are like stressed out all the time because they're worried what's going to happen the next day with their job. But if you have other areas, even if it's just like a passion project or something you're experimenting with, to not be so reliant on other people, and to have multiple sources is really empowering. And I think it's given me a lot more confidence, and you have stronger opinions and more confidence in whatever roles you're in, because you're not scared to speak up. You're not scared to be like, oh, I shouldn't say that to my boss because I don't want to get fired, but he's really doing the wrong thing for everybody. It's like, no, you say it, because what's the worst thing that can happen? Like, yeah, you part ways, but you have other things going on. So it's not the end of the world. It's not catastrophic. It doesn't send you into a tailspin of like depression or anxiety. Like, you're going to be okay. I mean, you're going to be okay anyway. I hope, like, most people will be okay. But if you have other things, you'll be in a better place. So my problem with entrepreneurship is like, I have too many ideas. I probably have like 100 domains that I own. So I've learned like, okay, you need to really focus on the things that you do best. And it's taken me a while to do that because I've dabbled in so many different things. So really right now I'm very focused on the work that I'm doing in marketing different finance companies.
How do these opportunities present themselves? I mean, I assume a lot of it comes from, like you said, putting yourself out there and building your brand, networking, which we talk about a lot. You're a networking all-star, which I love. How do most of these opportunities present themselves?
At first it was going after firms. Well, actually, no. At first, when I left my job and started Buy-Side Design, some of our clients at that job came to me and were like, we'd love for you to market with us. We know you're no longer there. So I was pretty lucky in that right after I left, I had work lined up. But then after that, in a series of projects, I literally like went to San Francisco and like knocked on hedge fund doors. Like, whether you want to meet with me or not, like, I'm going to show up at your office and like leave marketing material so you know who I am. And some of them called me back and some of them didn't. And we're like, where did you get our information? Like, no, we don't want anyone to know about us. And I was like, that's cool, but why? That's kind of weird, right? You guys are great. So it was at first a lot of like knocking on doors and cold calls. And then it was just doing the work and then people referring me to other people. And now it's just, phone calls come in. Like, I'm not even really actively marketing myself, which may change soon because, I'm very inspired by the things that I've seen lately and people building up their own personal brands and image. And like, I did that at first, but I've just been working for so many other people for so long that I'm like, I really need to start writing my own thought leadership and sharing what I know about marketing finance companies. So right now the business and projects just, people call me. And honestly, like I need help because I'm not able to help everybody. And I shared this with you a couple weeks ago. I'm looking for a video editor and some social media people. So if anyone out there is very good at animation and social, let me know.
Hashtag not an ad.
Wait, no,
yeah,
I can add.
Not a paid ad. But I mean, Brenna would be great to work with. So I guess I will kind of pile onto that a bit. Anyone would be lucky to work with her. So keep that in mind if you're listening in pursuit of triangle income, as we call it here. So I guess maybe we'll talk a little bit more specifically on the type of marketing you would do, because you have, the unique experience with where you started out trading and working with these larger institutions that are, putting in these orders and whatnot. I'm admittedly not an options trader, so I don't know the terms, but what's the current landscape of it right now? Like, what are the difficulties that you're facing and what trends are you seeing? I really don't know that much on the hedge fund side of things. And I guess maybe let's just dive into that a little bit more, if there's anything exciting anyways.
I mean, it starts with like something pretty simple, is like changing the thinking about marketing, because a lot of people throw spaghetti at the wall and see if it sticks, right? And what I have learned is that I have to have very honest discussions with people, whether they're at a fund or a different financial company, and say, are you looking at data? Like, look, Mr. or Mrs., you're a trader. and you're just blasting out marketing, but you're not looking at the analytics. Like how can that be? Because marketing is very similar to trading in that you need to do things like whatever positions you put on in trading or whatever positions you put on in marketing, you have to follow them and look at the data and see what's performing. And you want to do more of the things that are performing and less of the things that aren't. So while it sounds very simple, most people don't have the systems in place to actually monitor and analyze their marketing performance. So I start from the very basics, is like, show me everything, show me the data, and let's see where you're at. And most of the time they're like, I don't know where that data is. So we go in and, I show them and present it, and then start from the very basics of like, what is your brand? What is your tone of voice? How are you speaking to your audience? Are you speaking to your audience? What is the cadence that you're speaking to your audience? If it's a quarterly letter or it's a pitch deck or it's a social media campaign, it has to look of the same brand. It has to be the same personality. You have to care for it because it's a living, breathing thing. And then you have to monitor it. Like you have to monitor the health of your brand and your marketing campaigns. So it's a lot of psychology and discovery at first. And then it's about building the assets and the materials around that, because a lot of funds, like they may have a pitch deck, but their little cousin might have helped put it together, or like they got a logo off the internet, or they're using stock images of like the same guy that's on 50 websites, like holding another presentation deck. And it's boring. And it's like, you see the same kind of thing everywhere. So it's making them look more interesting and building the narrative. Like, why are you special? And some hedge fund managers think it's because they went to Harvard or because it's this, but it's like, it's a combination of different things. And it depends on the type of investor you're pitching. If you're pitching a pension, that's going to look a little different than pitching a family office, because they look for different things. They're attracted to different metrics or different data points about a hedge fund. So it's also about doing the research on who they're pitching. So it really depends on who the fund is, who the crypto company is, and who they're pitching. But at the very basics, it's a lot of psychology. Like, I know you interviewed the woman who was Wendy Rhodes on Billions. Yes. Yeah, Denise. And I identify with her story because she I don't know if she's still actively doing this, but from what I understand about her background, she worked through this psychology, what's holding hedge fund managers back in their performance, what do they need to let go of, what do they need to do more of, right? And I'm not saying I do that to any degree. I'm just saying I identify with it because a lot of times they don't know what they don't know, and it's just uncovering things for them and kind of showing them the light in marketing and branding. So I know my answers have been very long-winded. I'm very passionate about this, as you can see and hear.
Oh, never apologize for the long-winded answers. It's what we're here for. But honestly, I do think that that's kind of an interesting thing to get into with kind of pulling out, forcefully trying to get someone to pull out their value prop and them really not understanding that. And I think that because this could be sort of a transferable question for any industry, how do you even go about that process of discovery for, underlining that value prop? It seems like probably a little bit awkward at times too, when you're working with, the founders of these companies and they can't even tell you who they're targeting or what they're so special for or how they're different.
I mean, it's a lot of observing and research at first and just asking the questions. And sometimes hedge fund managers don't want to show me what they have, their goods. They're embarrassed. They're oh, that was so bad, or that one pager. But I'm I need to know where you're coming from to take you where you need to go. So just be completely honest and transparent with me. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to judge you. I've seen the worst of the, let me show you something really bad I saw once, right? If I really need to go there with them. But it's just building the trust at first, because, it's a sensitive thing. It's their positions, it's their performance, it's who they've talked to, their investors. So really it's about building up the trust at first and then finding out as much as I can and then figuring out where they need to go. Like some managers only want to raise $10 million. Others want to get to a very large amount of AUM, and that's a process. Like you're not going to get someone to write $100 million ticket when you're managing $500,000. Like that is never going to happen. And you're never going to get an allocation in 2 months. Like very few managers, it's a process. Another thing that I've learned is like no doesn't mean no. It really never does. I don't think in any industry. It just means not right now. Like be the squeaky wheel, feed them the information, keep them updated, follow what they're doing, send them articles, build goodwill. Like it's not just about, hey, here's my pitch deck. Will you invest in me? Like it's a lot more than that. It's relationship building. It's the goodwill. It's keeping them updated, having the investor relations program. It's a lot of different things, but at the core of all of it, whether it's me working with them or them pitching to an investor, it's about trust at the end of the day. I mean, I think that's with everything.
Yeah, especially financial services industry, and money is such an emotional thing, and even on the institutional side, it's a process. Like I haven't worked in the institutional side. I have a lot of friends who are kind of on allocator teams and whatnot, so limited exposure here, but it's a much longer process on that side. And I think that it's probably hard from a behavioral standpoint, like psychologically to, you want instant gratification. You want that money now, you want the deal closed. And it's a long sales cycle. And I think that there's a lot of people who go about it coming from like a limited experience in sales, but a lot of people just tend to go about these things in such a transactional manner, where it's actually, you're really doing yourself a favor by putting in more time, more energy, building actual relationships, goodwill, like you said. And I think that that's probably something that you struggle with as well, because a lot of people just really don't know how to sell, or they go about it the wrong way. And it definitely comes back to bite you if you're, the intentions aren't really there to make it a long-term relationship. Yep. It's like dating or something.
Totally. I often kid with like people and explaining what I do. I'm like, I'm basically getting hedge fund managers ready for prom. Like go to prom with like, an institutional allocator. Like you got to look your best. You got to smell nice. You got to, have the proper transportation. Anyway.
That's great. Hopefully they don't do too much dancing, but on the hedge fund still. So industry wise, just, I know you're more on like the marketing side of these things, but from an industry standpoint, how has it changed since you've been working in the space? And like, how do you see it changing in the future from kind of a macro standpoint?
I mean, geez, when I started in finance, hedge funds were like a very quiet, I don't want to say not transparent, but like they weren't very visible. Like you knew about them, you knew some of the big names, but the most you would see is maybe like a simple landing page. That has changed so much. I mean, people are doing video interviews, they're doing video series, they have robust websites, they have large communications and marketing teams. There's a lot more information being shared, which is better for everybody, because portfolio managers at hedge funds that are outperforming have a lot of intellectual capital. And for people that don't have that much financial markets experience, have access to those minds and that, that information is powerful. People can learn a lot from it. And I think when everybody learns more about finance and how to do more with their money, how to earn more, how to get greater yield, how to have risk manage better, what the different risk management tools are, how to hedge, how to put on an option positions that's going to protect your capital for the next year if there's a 30% swing in equity markets. Like that's really great for people to know. And so it's changed in such a good way that there's so much more information out there, and that hedge funds and portfolio managers are more publicly visible. So it's great for them. It's great for really everybody. I mean, some overcomplicate things, but that's okay. They're learning.
Aren't we all? Well, that's super interesting. I feel like I will keep an eye out on that now on the hedge fund stuff, just because I will probably be bugging you with plenty of questions after this that come from this conversation. But I do want to shift gears towards the end on the pod here. But any parting, before we get to more fun questions, because I want to talk to you about a very important topic. But before that, any wise parting words for people listening, whether that's, those who want to get that triangle income, those who are learning about crypto, those who want to start their own business, any of those things?
Take big risks while you can. I mean, honestly, it's like whether it's going to a networking and introducing yourself to a big speaker who you really want to make a contact with, and like whatever it is, like take those risks when you can, because as you get older in life, people become more risk averse. And it is very true, like higher risk, higher reward. It can also be higher risk, not as high of a reward. So try to like hedge your bets. Don't go YOLO into a trade. Like, I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about like be as ambitious as you can and get a little bit outside of your comfort zone, because that's really where I have had the most success. And like, I honestly wish I would have done even more of it. And I'm constantly challenging myself to like, I don't want to go to this networking thing, or like, I'm too tired to do this, that, or the, like, just push yourself as hard as you can, but also don't burn out. And that's a balance, to take a lot of risk, pushing yourself, get outside the box, and don't burn out. Because as an entrepreneur, it's really easy to do it. And I'm telling you, people joke about burnout, that it's not real. Like, it is, and you don't want to get there. So I don't know, that was also a mouthful. It's some sort of, everybody has their equation, like your output versus your input. And I realized lately, like I think I might be doing too much output. So I've kind of held myself back a little bit. I'm doing a lot more self-care and like saying no to certain things, because I can't. But yeah, I mean, where I felt kind of the most nervous or taken more risk, that's when I've really surprised myself and like gotten ahead in life, whether it's work or other areas. So another long-winded answer for you.
Yeah, but sage advice. And you mentioned a couple important things. First of all, take risks, which I love. Go to networking events, which is how we met. And I recall very distinctly that you mentioned that you almost didn't come. So case in point, Brenna would not be on the Chicks of Fintwit podcast today were it not for her showing up to networking events. So it all works out. This is proof if you needed it. And lastly, you mentioned self-care. So this is a great mini commercial for getting outside. I do not work for Big Outside, but I will always be an advocate of getting outside. So just put that out there. But I want to get to the end of this here, because one of the reasons that I find you fascinating, and we've covered many of the reasons in this podcast, but the last one, and possibly most important, is because of drones. So let's talk about drones a little bit. This is not finance, but I do like to ask people sometimes what you do to decompress. I know you're a big fan of the Get Outside as well. I wouldn't have had you on if you weren't. Obviously, that's a requirement here. If anyone's listening and wants to be on the pod, start getting outside now. Start tweeting about it. But let's talk about drones. How did you get into drones? And I know nothing about them, so please enlighten me.
Well, I was actually gifted a drone by my dad, who was droning. And so I got his old drone, and it was like sitting in a box for a long time. Honestly, I was like really intimidated to fly it. I actually didn't know it had a camera on it at the time. This might be a surprising story, but anyway, it was sitting in the box for a long time. And then it was like a few weeks after the pandemic started, and I was so tired of being inside and like trapped in my space. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I have that thing sitting in the corner. Like, I could fly that in the air, and I could like be outside of my space, but still be quarantined. Like, just seemed like the perfect way to get outside of my quarantine. So I remember I launched it in my backyard. And as it was like, I don't know, 5 feet in the air, it was like getting away from me. I grabbed it and I was like, oh no, I was like really nervous about putting the drone in the air. And then I was like, just let it go. So I let it go and it's like on top of my house. And I'm like, okay, this is really cool. I'm looking in the camera. And then I like look over at my neighbor's house. I'm like, what are they up to? And then I was like, I expanded my horizons, and then I went to the lagoon down the street, and then I went to like this hiking trail. So I'd go and check out these different spaces. And it was such a like stress reliever for me, because I'll be honest, like when the quarantine started, I remember being in my car after like my first trip to the grocery store. Like I have a video where I'm like hysterical because I was so upset, like seeing people in masks and being afraid of like touching anything in the grocery store. Like I was like all-time high anxiety. So anyway, I started flying the drone, and then I would tell my sister every time I flew it, I'd be like, I went here and I flew it and check out all these photos. And I'd send her like 40 photos at once. And then she sat me down. She's like, Brenna, I love how passionate you are about droning, but I am not that passionate. So do you think you could like go start a meetup group or something so you could share your passion with other people? And I was like, okay, yeah, that's a great idea. So I started this drone meetup group in San Diego, and no one showed up for the first couple of weeks. So I felt like a total loser. And then this guy, Roger, showed up, and he didn't even have a drone at the time, but he was like, this is really cool. So then the next week he brought his drone, and then like people started showing up because they started seeing that we were being consistent in these meetup groups. And now I think I have 150 members, and we do it every couple of weeks, and we go droning at the beach. I went to Hawaii with one of my drone group people, and we drone humpback whales. Like it's always been my dream to see humpback whales in Maui. And like, I finally got to see it. And I was like on the beach, like crying happy tears because I have footage of like this humpback whale and its baby, and they're like swimming together and cuddling. And it's the most precious thing I've ever seen. By the way, I'm also obsessed with whales. So to combine like droning and whales is just such a like, it's just like gives me chills. I'm so grateful for that experience. But yeah, now I go and I look for like dolphins and stuff in the ocean. And I'm so grateful for my drone group because it literally relieves so much anxiety and like stress of being alone during the quarantines. Like I didn't have a pot. It was like me and my dog. So to be able to get out and be like socially distanced from people and participate in this really cool activity, really provided a lot of relief.
Wow. 150 people with drones in San Diego. That is impressive in itself.
We don't all meet up at one time. So, I mean, like, usually there's like 10, 12 people that show up. But yeah, it's super fun. And I met all sorts of wonderful people.
It must sound like a beehive with all those drones running around.
It does. Like sometimes we go to the beach and it's sunset and there's like 8 drones in the air, and I keep mine grounded because people on the beach, like you're there for quiet time. So try to be like fast and getting out to the ocean so as not to disturb people with their beach time.
Yeah. Well, next time I come to San Diego, I need to see this contraption because I've never seen a drone, I don't think, at least not up close. So we'll go droning. Add me to your club, +1. Gosh, that's so interesting. What a way to get outside. I'll stop with the ads now, but we do love that. And it's such a good way to decompress. I remember you mentioning, we talked about whales for a while when I met you. I do remember that. So not a bad thing. There are much worse things. I think they're cool. Belugas are probably belugas might be my favorite. I guess, yeah. What's your favorite whale? We'll end it on that one. What's your favorite whale if you had to choose?
Probably whale shark, because I got to swim with whale sharks in Mexico. So why are you laughing? Okay, my favorite whale is a Bitcoin whale. I don't know. All whales.
I mean, that's a good answer too. I'm more laughing because I couldn't think of a whale other than like a humpback whale. I don't even know. I just clearly need to be schooled on whales is kind of why I was laughing.
Graceful humpback whales.
We can talk about them offline. I'm very curious. You can give me some whale resources. You need to share those whale videos because I know Bobby, who's on here as well, would like to see them. So That is a good follow-up item, if you will.
Maybe Bob can help me start a whale podcast.
A whale pod.
There we go.
There we go. Well, there you have it. All right. Well, that's the follow-up from this podcast, is that there will be a whale one. Will whales be on the podcast? I'm not sure. They'll probably talk about whales, but we'll leave it up to a mystery there. So that's a great way to end. No better way to end than with whales, I guess. That's a first for me. So thank you. But on a real note, thank you so much for joining. This was fantastic. I think you're incredible. I want to be Brenna when I grow up, actually, for anyone listening out there. So huge fan. But thank you again. Would love to have you on again at some point. But Brenna, where can everyone find you to follow your whale content, your marketing content, and anything else?
Right now, Twitter's the best space. So at Brenna.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you to everyone for listening. Like and subscribe to our pages if you have not already done so at Chicks of Fintwit on Twitter, and subscribe to the SNN Podcast Network. We have video versions of these podcasts on YouTube. And thanks for listening. We will catch you next week.
Thank you.